The pale blue light of Zephyr Prime's twin suns filtered through the windows of the military hospital. Commander Vexthul sat in the circle with the other veterans, his forearms folded across his scaled chest. His yellow eyes stared at the floor. While Dr. Mordain spoke about healing and moving forward, the words meant nothing to him. How could he heal from something that had broken his very understanding of the universe? The therapy room smelled of antiseptic and fear. 5 other veterans sat with him in uncomfortable chairs. There was Ziktar, the insectoid warrior whose compound eyes never stopped moving. His species had ruled 3-star systems before the humans came. Now he jumped at every shadow. Resonance 7 hummed softly, the crystalline being's body flickering between colors as emotions passed through him like light through a prism. The others were just as broken. Dr. Mordain was asking about the war again. She always asked about the war. Her 6 tentacles writhed as she spoke, a sign of her own nervousness. Even the doctors were afraid of human stories now. The young Zephyrian recruit in the corner, barely old enough to have scales, leaned forward. With bright eyes, he wanted to hear war stories. He thought war was glorious. Vexthul wanted to tell him the truth. War was not glorious. War with humans was not even war. It was something else entirely. Something that had no name in any of the 47 languages. He spoke. The recruit asked his question with the eagerness of youth. What were the humans really like? Why did everyone fear them so much? They were just mammals from a backwater world. They had been in space for less than 50 years when the war started. How could such primitives defeat the greatest military alliance in galactic history? Ziktar's wings buzzed with agitation. Resonance 7's humming grew discordant. The other veterans shifted in their seats like prey animals sensing danger. They all knew what came next. Someone would have to explain. Someone would have to remember. Dr. Mordain looked at Vexthul with those large, knowing eyes. She had been asking him to share for months. She said it would help him heal. She said facing the memories would take away their power. She did not understand that some memories were not meant to be faced. Some truths were too terrible to speak aloud, but the young recruit was still waiting. His scales were bright green with curiosity and excitement. He had never seen a human. He had only heard the official reports that called them defeated and contained. He did not know that containing humans was like trying to hold starlight in your claws. Vexthul's throat made the clicking sound his species used for deep thought. The room fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the air recyclers. Outside, civilian ships moved through the sky in orderly patterns. Everything was peaceful now. Everything was safe. The humans were gone from this part of space. He began to speak, his voice rough from disuse. The war had started 15 years ago when the Galactic Coalition first encountered the human homeworld. Earth, they called it. A beautiful blue marble, hanging in space like a jewel. The Coalition had been expanding for 3 centuries, bringing civilization to primitive worlds. Earth seemed like just another conquest. The humans had crude technology and simple weapons. Their ships were barely capable of interplanetary flight. Their societies were divided into hundreds of small nations that fought each other over trivial matters. Every computer model said they would surrender within days of first contact. Every expert agreed they would be grateful for the chance to join galactic civilization as a servant species. The Coalition sent a small fleet to demand their submission. Standard procedure for primitive worlds. A show of force followed by generous terms of surrender. Most species saw the wisdom in joining. The stronger side. The humans saw something else entirely. Vexthul remembered watching the human response on the command deck of his flagship. The human leader, a female with graying hair and cold eyes, had looked directly into the camera when she spoke. Her words were simple and clear. Earth did not surrender. Earth did not bow. Earth would fight. The coalition officers had laughed. A few thousand primitive warships against 10,000 advanced vessels. It would not even be a real battle. They began planning the occupation before the first shots were fired. That was their first mistake. They thought they understood what they were facing. They thought humans were like every other species in the galaxy. They thought wrong. The recruit was hanging on every word now. He wanted to know what made humans different. What made them so dangerous? Vexthel looked at him with something like pity. How could he explain what no one had understood until it was too late? Humans did not fight like other species. Other species fought for territory or resources or dominance. They fought because their leaders commanded it or because their survival depended on it. They fought until the cost became too high, and then they stopped. This was rational. This was logical. This was how civilized beings conducted war. Humans fought for ideas. Abstract concepts that existed only in their minds. They called these things freedom and justice and dignity. They valued these invisible things more than their own lives, more than their own children's lives, more than their entire species continuing to exist. The coalition learned this lesson slowly and painfully. Every human settlement they attacked fought to the last being. Every human ship they cornered exploded rather than surrender. Every human soldier they captured died before revealing information. It was not courage in any way the galaxy understood courage. It was something beyond courage, something beyond reason. Vexthel paused in his story, seeing the confusion in the young recruit's eyes. The recruit was trying to understand how a species could be suicidal and still win battles. It seemed like a contradiction. Vexthel had thought the same thing until he met Lisa. Dr. Mordain encouraged him to continue. She said speaking about specific memories would help process the trauma. Vexthel almost laughed. There was no processing what humans could do. There was only surviving the knowledge. He told them about Lisa Martinez, a human engineer assigned to a supply station in the Kepler system. She was small even by human standards, barely reaching his shoulder. Her hair was dark and pulled back, in a simple style. Her brown eyes showed intelligence, but nothing that seemed threatening. She looked like prey. The coalition had targeted the supply station as part of a larger offensive. Cut off human logistics, and their resistance would crumble. Simple strategy that had worked on 100 other worlds. 2,000 elite troops against 200 human defenders. The battle should have lasted hours. It lasted 3 weeks. And Lisa Martinez was the reason why. Vexthel's voice grew quieter as he remembered. The other veterans were listening now, too, their own memories stirring. They all had their own stories about humans who had done impossible things. Humans who had changed the course of battles through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The young recruit was no longer excited. Something in Vexthel's tone was beginning to reach him. The understanding that war stories were not glorious adventures, but scars that never healed. The knowledge that some enemies were worse than death because they forced you to become something you never wanted to be. Vexthel looked at each face in the circle and saw his own haunted expression reflected back at him. They were all broken by the same terrible truth. Humans were not just another species to be conquered or contained. They were something new in the galaxy, something that changed every assumption about how intelligent life behaved. The session timer chimed softly, indicating their time was almost up. Dr. Mordain made notes on her datapad while the veterans prepared to return to their rooms. But the young recruit remained, his scales now pale with dawning understanding. Tomorrow they would meet again. Tomorrow Vexthel would tell them about the siege, about what Lisa Martinez did when she was trapped alone with an entire battalion hunting her, about why he still woke up screaming her name 15 years after the war ended. Some stories, once begun, demanded to be finished. The next day brought heavier rain to Zephyr Prime. Vex Thul listened to the drops hitting the hospital windows as the veterans gathered once again in their circle. The young recruit was there early, his scales still pale from yesterday's revelations. He was beginning to understand that war stories were not entertainment. Dr. Mordain noticed the change in the room's atmosphere. Yesterday, there had been reluctance and fear. Today, there was a grim acceptance that some truths needed to be spoken. She settled her tentacles around her datapad and nodded to Vex Thul. The story would continue. Vex Thul's 4 hands traced patterns on his knees as he remembered. The Kepler station operation had been planned for months. Coalition intelligence reported it as a simple supply depot with minimal defenses. 200 humans maintaining equipment and processing resource shipments. An easy target that would cripple human logistics in 3 sectors. His battalion had been chosen for the honor of taking the station. 2,000 of the Zephyrian Empire's finest warriors, equipped with the best weapons and armor. They would overwhelm the humans through sheer numbers and advanced technology. The battle plan called for a swift assault followed by interrogation of survivors to learn supply routes and schedules. The station hung in space like a metal flower, its docking arms extending in 6 directions. Human ships came and went in steady streams, unaware that death was approaching. Vex Thul had felt sorry for them in those final hours before the attack. They seemed so innocent and unprepared for what was coming. The assault began at 0300 station, time when the humans would be least alert. Breach pods slammed into the outer hull, while fighters destroyed the few patrol craft. The first phase went exactly according to plan. Coalition forces secured the outer ring and began advancing toward the station core. Resistance was light and scattered. Then they reached the lower levels, and everything changed. Vex Thul's voice grew tighter as he described what they found. The corridors that should have been empty were filled with traps. Walls that had been solid metal the day before now crackled with lethal electricity. Maintenance hatches opened to reveal improvised bombs. The station's own systems had been turned against them, but it was not random destruction. Every trap was precisely placed to channel their advance along specific routes. Someone with intimate knowledge of the station layout was thinking several moves ahead, predicting exactly where they would go and what they would do. Someone was playing a game where the pieces were made of flesh and blood. Lisa Martinez had been trapped in the engineering section when the attack began. Standard procedure would have been to hide until rescue arrived or surrender when discovered. No other species in the galaxy would have attempted what she did next. No other species would have even conceived it as possible. She had turned the entire lower section into a weapon aimed at his soldiers. The first sign had been the artificial gravity. As his troops moved through the main corridor, the gravity suddenly reversed, slamming them into the ceiling with bone-breaking force. Then it shifted 90 degrees, throwing them against the walls. Then it began to rotate like a centrifuge, spinning faster and faster until even his strongest warriors were pressed helpless against the bulkheads. When the gravity finally stopped, half his assault team was dead or unconscious. The survivors found themselves facing a new horror. Lisa had reprogrammed every maintenance drone in the section, turning them from simple repair units into flying death machines. They swarmed through the corridors like mechanical insects, there, cutting tools and welding torches, now weapons of war. Vex Thul paused to let his audience absorb this information. Ziktar was clicking his mandibles in agitation, remembering his own encounters with human ingenuity. Resonance 7's body flickered through colors that had no names, emotions too complex for simple description. The young recruit looked sick, but the worst was yet to come. Lisa had not simply created random chaos. She had a plan that became clear only as it unfolded. Every attack drove his forces deeper into the section, away from escape routes and reinforcements. She was hurting them, like prey animals, using their own tactical training against them. The power conduits became her artillery. With a few keystrokes, she could overload any section of the station's electrical grid, creating explosions precisely where his soldiers would take cover. She had memorized every hiding spot and choke point in the engineering section and could deliver death to any of them at will. His troops began to break. These were veteran soldiers who had fought in dozen campaigns across the galaxy. They had faced enemy armies and alien monsters and the vacuum of space itself. But they had never faced an opponent who could reshape the battlefield with her thoughts, who could turn the very walls into enemies. Lisa herself remained invisible throughout the first day of fighting. She spoke to them through the station's communication system, her voice calm and professional as she described exactly how she was going to kill them. She explained the technical details of each trap with the same tone another engineer might use to describe routine maintenance procedures. She told them about the explosives she had placed throughout the section, enough to destroy the entire lower level and everyone in it. She told them about the backup power systems she had sabotaged, ensuring that life support would fail when she chose. She told them about the docking clamps she had modified to prevent their escape. But most terrifying of all, she told them why she was doing it. Vexthul's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The room was completely silent except for the rain against the windows. Even Dr. Mordain had stopped taking notes, her tentacles frozen with attention. Lisa Martinez was not fighting for her own survival. She knew she was going to die. She had accepted that fact the moment the attack began. She was fighting to delay them long enough for human reinforcements to arrive. She was trading her life and the lives of everyone on the station to buy time for others to escape. This was when Vexthul began to understand that humans were fundamentally different from every other species in the galaxy. Other beings fought to preserve themselves and their immediate families. Humans fought for abstract concepts like duty and sacrifice that made no evolutionary sense. They could choose death over survival if death served a greater purpose. On the second day of the siege, his remaining forces finally cornered her. She was in the main engineering control room, surrounded by screens showing the station systems. Her fingers moved across control panels with practiced efficiency while explosions echoed through the corridors outside. She was conducting a symphony of destruction. When Vexthul's squad broke through the final barriers, they found her waiting for them. She sat calmly in the chief engineer's chair, her hands folded in her lap. Her brown eyes met his without fear or hatred. She looked at him like he was simply another problem to be solved. She spoke to him in accented Coalition standard, her pronunciation careful and precise. She told him that the station was rigged to explode in 30 seconds. She told him that his ships would not be able to jump to hyperspace due to the gravity mines she had deployed. She told him that human reinforcements would arrive in 6 hours. Then she smiled. It was not a cruel smile or a triumphant one. It was the smile of someone who had solved a difficult equation and was satisfied with her work. She had calculated the exact cost of delaying his advance and had paid that price without hesitation. Her life, the lives of her colleagues, the destruction of the station itself, all acceptable losses in service of her greater strategy. Vexthul had 15 seconds to choose between trying to capture her and trying to escape. He chose escape, abandoning 20 soldiers to the blast rather than risk losing more. It was the rational choice, the tactical choice, the choice any coalition commander would have made. Lisa Martinez died in the explosion she had triggered, but her sacrifice bought the time she had promised. Human reinforcements arrived exactly when she had predicted, catching his damaged fleet in a vulnerable position. The delay caused by her one-woman siege allowed the humans to save 3 entire star systems from coalition control. The young recruit was openly weeping now, his scales shifting through colors of grief and terror. He was beginning to understand why the veterans needed therapy, why they woke up screaming in the night. They had not simply lost a war. They had discovered that the universe contained beings capable of things that challenged the very definition of sanity. Dr. Mordain called for a break, sensing that the group had reached their emotional limit for the day. But Vexthul was not finished. He needed them to understand the full scope of what humans could do. Tomorrow he would tell them about Jake Peterson, the medic who killed while healing. Tomorrow he would explain why human compassion was more terrifying than their weapons. The rain continued to fall as the veterans filed out of the room. Behind them, the empty chairs seemed to hold the ghosts of all the humans who had died doing impossible things. Lisa Martinez and countless others who had chosen duty over survival, sacrifice over sense. Some stories demanded to be finished, no matter how much they hurt to tell. A third day brought clear skies to Zephyr Prime, but the mood in the therapy room remained dark. Word had spread through the hospital about Vexthul's stories. Other veterans who usually avoided the sessions had begun gathering outside the door, listening through the walls. The humans were gone from this sector of space, but their legend continued to grow, with each telling. Dr. Mordain arrived early to find Vexthul already in his chair, staring out the window at the peaceful city. Below, his scales had lost their healthy shine over the past few days, becoming dull and gray with the weight of memory. She wondered if forcing him to relive these experiences was truly helping, or simply transferring his trauma to others. The young recruit entered quietly, his earlier enthusiasm completely gone. Yesterday's story had broken something in him, the same thing that had been broken in all of them during the war. The understanding that the universe was not a rational place where stronger forces always prevailed. Sometimes smaller forces won through sheer refusal to accept the logic of defeat, and Resonance 7 took their usual places, along with the other regular attendees. But today they were joined by new faces. Veterans from other wards, who had heard fragments of the human stories and needed to witness the full telling. The circle expanded to accommodate them all, each alien face showing the same haunted expression. Vexthul began without preamble, his voice carrying the flat tone of someone reporting facts too terrible for emotion. After the disaster at Kepler Station, Coalition Command had changed tactics. If they could not overwhelm human defenses through direct assault, they would break human morale by targeting their support systems, medical facilities, supply depots, civilian shelters, places where humans would feel compelled to defend others rather than themselves. It seemed like a logical strategy. Every species had breaking points, lines they would not allow enemies to cross. Force them to choose between military objectives and protecting the helpless, and rational beings would eventually negotiate. The Coalition had used this approach successfully on dozens of worlds. They did not understand that humans drew their strength from protecting others, not despite it. The target was a field hospital on Havana 7, a jungle world that had become a key battleground in the war's second year. Intelligence reported 200 wounded human soldiers being treated by small medical staff. The facility was lightly defended and isolated from main human forces, a perfect target for psychological warfare. Vexthul's battalion approached through the dense jungle, moving carefully to avoid human patrol routes. The hospital was located in a cleared area surrounded by temporary structures. White tents marked with red crosses, the human symbol for medical aid. Under Galactic convention, such facilities were supposed to be neutral ground, but the Coalition had decided that human terrorists forfeited their right to such protections. The attack began at dawn with artillery strikes on the outer defenses. Human soldiers emerged from concealed positions to return fire, but they were vastly outnumbered. The Coalition forces advanced steadily, overwhelming each defensive line in turn. Within 2 hours, they had surrounded the main hospital complex. That was when Vexthul first encountered Jake Peterson. Jake was a human combat medic, recognizable by the red cross on his helmet and the medical supplies strapped to his back. He was treating wounded soldiers in the main surgical tent when the coalition forces breached the perimeter. According to every rule of civilized warfare, medical personnel were non-combatants who should surrender when their position became untenable. Jake Peterson had apparently never read those rules. Vexthul watched through his scope as Jake worked on a patient with massive chest wounds. The human's hands moved with steady precision, stopping bleeding and stabilizing injuries even as explosions shook the tent around him. Coalition soldiers were advancing from 3 directions, their weapons trained on the medical facility. Jake never stopped working. A coalition squad burst through the tent entrance, plasma rifles raised and ready to fire. They shouted for surrender. In standard, their weapons aimed at the wounded humans lying helpless on makeshift operating tables. This was the moment when any rational being would accept defeat and hope for mercy from their captors. Jake looked up from his patient, blood covering his hands and surgical uniform. His blue eyes met the squad leader's gaze, without fear or anger, only mild annoyance at the interruption. He spoke quietly, his voice barely audible over the sounds of battle outside. He told them to wait their turn. The squad leader was so surprised by this response that he actually lowered his weapon. No enemy had ever treated coalition soldiers like patients in need of scheduling. Jake returned his attention to the wounded man, his hands working inside the open chest cavity while he explained what he was doing in the calm tone of a teacher addressing students. One of the coalition soldiers raised his rifle again, apparently intending to shoot Jake where he stood. That was when the human medic revealed the weapon holstered at his side. Vexthul's voice grew quieter as he described what happened next. The room was completely silent, every alien veteran leaning forward to catch each word. This was the part of human behavior that none of them could fully comprehend, the contradiction that had broken their understanding of how intelligent life was supposed to function. Jake Peterson drew and fired in one smooth motion, never taking his eyes off his patient or removing his other hand from inside the chest wound. The coalition soldier dropped instantly, a perfect shot to the center of mass. Jake holstered his weapon and continued the surgery as if nothing had happened. 2 more soldiers died the same way. Quick, precise shots followed by immediate return to medical duties. Jake's movements flowed seamlessly between saving life and taking it, each action performed with the same professional competence. He talked to his patient throughout the engagement, his voice calm and reassuring even as he killed enemies threatening their position. The remaining coalition soldiers retreated in confusion, reporting that the hospital was defended by some kind of warrior priest who fought with medical instruments in one hand and death in the other. Command did not believe their reports until additional squads encountered the same phenomenon throughout the facility. Every human medic in the hospital was armed and willing to fight. They treated wounded soldiers and killed enemies with equal skill and dedication. They followed no logic that coalition tacticians could understand. They would risk their lives to save a single wounded enemy, then kill a dozen healthy enemies to protect their patients. Jake Peterson became the symbol of this contradiction when Vexthul's forces finally overran his position. The human medic had been operating continuously for 18 hours, performing surgeries while fighting off multiple attacks. His surgical instruments were laid out on a blood-soaked table next to his service pistol, both used with the same steady hands. When coalition soldiers finally surrounded him, Jake was working on his 4th patient of the day. The man had taken plasma burns across his legs and would die without immediate amputation. Jake had the bone saw in his hands when enemy weapons trained on his position He asked for 5 minutes to finish the surgery. The coalition commander, a Zephyrian like Vexthul, was so amazed by this request that he agreed. He wanted to understand what drove humans to such extremes of behavior. He watched Jake work with fascination and growing horror as the human medic calmly removed the patient's damaged leg while enemy soldiers pointed weapons at his head. Jake finished the amputation with clinical precision, sealed the wounds, and administered pain medication. He spoke gently to the wounded soldier, assuring him that he would survive and recover. Only then did he stand and face his captors, blood covering his surgical gown and exhaustion etched in every line of his face. The coalition commander offered Jake the chance to surrender and receive treatment under medical conventions. His skills would be useful in coalition hospitals. His life could be spared in exchange for cooperation. Jake Peterson's response had become legend among human forces, and nightmare fuel for coalition veterans. He told them that he had taken an oath to do no harm. He had sworn to preserve life wherever he found it, and to fight death with every tool at his disposal. He could not serve an army that targeted the helpless and wounded. He could not stand by while others suffered when he had the power to help them. Then he picked up his weapon and opened fire. Vexthul's voice broke as he described Jake's final stand. The human medic fought from behind the operating table, using his own body to shield his patients from enemy fire. He moved from cover to cover, drawing coalition soldiers away from the wounded while engaging them with deadly accuracy. He could have escaped multiple times during the battle. The jungle was thick and coalition forces were spread thin. Any rational being would have fled to preserve their own life and continue helping others another day. Jake Peterson chose to stay and die rather than abandon patients who could not defend themselves. When coalition reinforcements finally overwhelmed the position, they found Jake's body draped across his last patient. He had taken 17 plasma burns, but had managed to keep fighting until his heart stopped. The wounded soldier beneath him survived to be evacuated by human rescue forces. The fourth day brought an unusual stillness to the hospital. Word of Vexthul's stories had spread beyond the veteran wards, reaching the civilian staff and even some of the city beyond. Zephyrians who had never seen combat found themselves unable to sleep, haunted by second-hand accounts of human warfare. The hospital director had asked Dr. Mordain to consider ending the sessions, but she understood that some wounds could only heal through complete exposure. Vexthul arrived to find the therapy room overflowing. Veterans from every ward had come to hear the continuation of his testimony. They sat on the floor when chairs ran out, pressed against the walls and standing room that barely accommodated their alien forms. The young recruit sat in the front row, his scales now permanently pale. Aged beyond his years by knowledge, he could never UNLEARN. Dr. Mordain had given up any pretense of conducting normal therapy. This had become something else entirely. A ritual of shared trauma that served purposes beyond individual healing. The veterans needed to know they were not alone in their incomprehension, that others had witnessed the same impossible things and survived to tell about them. Vexthul looked out over the assembled faces and saw his own bewilderment reflected in dozens of alien eyes. They had all encountered humans in battle and emerged fundamentally changed by the experience. Not just defeated, but transformed in ways that challenged their basic understanding of how intelligent life was supposed to behave. He began the day's story with a simple statement that sent ripples of recognition through the crowd. Space combat, he said, was supposed to follow certain rules. Ships of similar size engaged each other at maximum weapons range, using superior technology and tactics to achieve victory with minimal losses. Larger vessels defeated smaller ones through overwhelming firepower. Fleets maneuvered like dancers, seeking advantage through position and coordination. Humans, as usual, had ignored every rule The Battle of the Crimson Nebula had been intended as a decisive engagement to break human resistance in the outer systems. Vigsthill commanded a battle group of 12 heavy cruisers, the pride of the Zephyrian fleet. Each ship was over a kilometer long and armed with weapons capable of cracking planets. Against them, human forces had sent a single destroyer. The USS Manhattan was barely 200 meters from bow to stern, a tiny vessel that would normally serve as an escort for larger ships. Its weapons were primitive projectile cannons and chemical explosives, technology that the Coalition had abandoned centuries ago. By every measure of military logic, the engagement should have lasted minutes. It lasted 6 hours and cost Vigsthill most of his fleet. Captain Ryan Brooks commanded the Manhattan with a crew of just 200 humans. Intelligence reports described him as a typical military officer, competent but unremarkable. His service record showed steady advancement through routine assignments, with no indication of exceptional tactical ability. Coalition analysts had dismissed him as another desperate human, throwing away his life in a futile gesture. They had failed to understand that humans drew their greatest strength from desperate situations. The battle began conventionally enough. Vigstill's fleet emerged from hyperspace in standard formation, expecting to overwhelm the lone human ship through coordinated fire. The Manhattan appeared on their sensors exactly where intelligence had predicted, apparently waiting for them. In open space, Brooks had made no attempt to hide or flee, behaviors that would have been rational for such an outmatched vessel. Instead, he had positioned his ship at the edge of the Crimson Nebula itself. Vigsthill paused to explain the nature of the nebula to those who had not encountered such phenomena. The Crimson Nebula was a cloud of ionized gas, an electromagnetic storm spanning several light years. The constant electrical activity made sensors unreliable and communications nearly impossible. Navigation through the nebula required special equipment and extreme caution. No rational captain would risk their ship in such dangerous conditions. Captain Brooks flew directly into the storm. The Manhattan vanished from Coalition sensors as the nebula's interference scrambled their targeting systems. Vigsthill ordered his fleet to surround the nebula and wait for the human ship to emerge. Standard doctrine called for maintaining safe distance from the electromagnetic storms while monitoring all possible exit points. The human captain had simply trapped himself in a prison of his own making. Then the first Coalition cruiser exploded. The Manhattan had emerged from the nebula's chaotic energy like a predator from tall grass, appearing suddenly behind the Coalition formation. Brooks had used the nebula's own electrical activity to mask his ship's approach, timing his attack to coincide with a particularly violent storm front that blinded enemy sensors at the crucial moment. The Manhattan's primitive weapons should not have been capable of destroying a Coalition heavy cruiser. The enemy ship's shields and armor were designed to withstand far more advanced attacks. But Brooks had not attacked the cruiser directly. He had targeted its weapon systems, using precise shots to trigger a chain reaction in the ship's own armaments. The Coalition vessel destroyed itself with its own firepower. Before Vigstill's fleet could respond, the Manhattan vanished back into the nebula's embrace. Vigstill's voice grew tight with remembered frustration as he described the next 5 hours. Brooks turned the nebula into his personal hunting ground, using its storms and electromagnetic interference to appear and disappear at will. The Manhattan would emerge without warning, deliver a devastating attack on a single target, and vanish again before the Coalition fleet could bring their superior numbers to bear. Each attack was precisely calculated to achieve maximum damage, with minimal exposure. Brooks never engaged multiple targets simultaneously or remained visible long enough for coordinated retaliation. He fought like a surgeon, cutting away pieces of the Coalition fleet with methodical precision while remaining untouchable himself. The human captain's tactics violated every principle of space combat doctrine. He used the nebula's dangerous conditions as an asset rather than an obstacle, pushing his ship through electrical storms that would have disabled coalition vessels. He accepted risks that no rational commander would contemplate, trusting in human engineering and his crew's ability to function under impossible conditions. But most disturbing of all was his apparent prescience regarding coalition responses. Every time Vexthil's fleet attempted to counter Brooks' tactics, the human captain anticipated their moves and adapted accordingly. When they tried to enter the nebula in pursuit, he led them into electrical storms that damaged their more sophisticated systems. When they attempted to predict his emergence points, he attacked from directions they had not considered possible. It was as if Brooks could read Vexthil's mind and plan his responses accordingly. The truth was both simpler and more terrifying. Captain Brooks was not psychic or possessed of superhuman intelligence. He was simply thinking like a human while fighting opponents who thought like every other species in the galaxy. He accepted possibilities that rational beings would reject, pursued strategies that logical minds would dismiss as suicidal. He fought as if his ship and crew were already dead, which freed him from the need to preserve them. Vexthel described the Manhattan's final attack with something approaching reverence. By the time Brooks made his last run, only 4 coalition cruisers remained operational. The human ship emerged from the nebula trailing fire and atmosphere, clearly damaged beyond repair. Its weapons were failing, and its engines sputtered with each course correction. Any rational captain would have attempted to escape or negotiate surrender. Brooks accelerated toward Vexthul's flagship at maximum velocity. The Manhattan's final approach was a thing of terrible beauty. Brooks had timed his emergence to coincide with the nebula's most violent electrical storm, using the cosmic lightning as cover for his attack run. The damaged destroyer came straight at them through a maelstrom of energy that would have torn apart any other ship in the galaxy. Vexthil ordered evasive maneuvers, but Brooks had anticipated this response. The human captain was not aiming for where the flagship was, but where it would be when the collision occurred. He had calculated trajectory and timing with mathematical precision, accounting for every variable, including his own ship's deteriorating condition. The Manhattan struck Vexthil's flagship amidships at nearly 1/3 light speed. The impact should have vaporized both vessels instantly. Instead, Brooks had arranged something far more elaborate. In the seconds before collision, every escape pod on the Manhattan launched simultaneously. But these were not carrying crew members seeking safety. They had been converted into guided missiles, each one packed with improvised explosives and programmed to strike different targets in the coalition formation. Captain Brooks had turned his crew's only means of survival into weapons. The escape pods struck 3 coalition cruisers in perfect synchronization with the Manhattan's impact. On the flagship, Brooks had orchestrated the destruction of 4 enemy vessels with a single coordinated attack, using his own ship as the primary weapon and his crew's escape systems as supporting artillery. The final day arrived with storm clouds gathering over Zephyr Prime. The hospital had become a pilgrimage site for veterans across the planet, beings who had traveled from distant cities to hear the conclusion of Vexthil's testimony. The therapy room could no longer contain the crowd, so the session had been moved to the hospital's main auditorium. Hundreds of alien faces looked up at the stage where Vexthil sat alone, the weight of their collective trauma pressing down like a physical force. Dr. Morgaine had ceased any pretense of medical supervision. This had evolved beyond therapy into something approaching a religious experience, a ritual cleansing of shared wounds that could only be completed through total honesty. The veterans needed to confront the full scope of what they had witnessed, to understand why their minds had broken under the strain of fighting an enemy that operated outside all known parameters of rational behavior. Vexthil stood before the assembly and felt the familiar click in his throat as he prepared to speak. The final truth. This was the story he had never told anyone, not even Dr. Mordain during their private sessions. This was the memory that woke him screaming every night, the encounter that had shattered his understanding of what it meant to be a living, thinking being in a comprehensible universe. He began with a simple statement that sent whispers through the crowd. The war's end had not come through military defeat or negotiated surrender. It had come through revelation, through the coalition's gradual understanding that they were not fighting a war at all. They were participating in something far more fundamental, a contest between different concepts of what life itself was supposed to mean. The final battle had taken place in the Sol system, humanity's home territory where Earth hung like a blue jewel among the stars. Coalition forces had assembled the largest fleet in galactic history, determined to end human resistance through overwhelming force applied directly to their homeworld. If humans would not surrender to preserve distant colonies, surely they would capitulate to save their birthplace. It was the last and greatest misunderstanding in a war built on misunderstandings. Vexthil had commanded one of the assault groups tasked with securing human prisoners for interrogation. Intelligence reports suggested that captured humans might finally reveal the location of their hidden weapon facilities or the source of their impossible tactical innovations. The coalition needed to understand how such a primitive species had developed strategies that countered every advantage of superior technology. They captured Amy Chun during the fighting on Luna, Earth's moon, where human forces had established their final defensive positions. She was a private in the human army, barely out of training according to her service record. A young female with dark hair and intelligent eyes who should have represented everything weak and vulnerable about the human species. She had been defending a communications facility when coalition forces overran her position. Her squad had fought to the last soldier, using tactics that made no sense according to standard doctrine. They had sacrificed themselves to buy mere minutes of additional transmission time, dying to send messages that contained no strategic information whatsoever. Amy had been found unconscious in the facility's ruins, injured but alive. Standard procedure called for immediate medical treatment followed by interrogation to extract useful intelligence. Coalition forces had become expert at breaking captured enemies through a combination of physical pressure and psychological manipulation. Most species revealed everything they knew within hours of capture. Amy Chun lasted 3 days without revealing a single piece of useful information. Vexthul's voice grew quieter as he described those 3 days of interrogation. He had been present as an observer, hoping to understand what drove human resistance to such extremes. Coalition experts had tried every technique in their arsenal, from direct threats to sophisticated mental manipulation. They had offered rewards and promised punishments, used drugs and technology, and simple physical persuasion. Amy had smiled through it all, not the grim smile of someone enduring torture through determination, but the genuine smile of someone who found the entire situation amusing. She answered every question with patient courtesy, providing detailed explanations that revealed absolutely nothing of value. When asked about Earth's defenses, she described the beauty of human sunsets. When questioned about military installations, she recited poetry about home and family. The interrogators grew increasingly frustrated as their subject refused to respond according to established patterns. Amy showed no fear of pain or death, no concern for her own welfare or that of her fellow soldiers. She treated the sessions like casual conversations with slightly boring acquaintances, showing more interest in her captor's psychological states than in her own predicament. On the second day, coalition intelligence officers attempted a different approach. They showed Amy recordings of human colonies under attack, hoping to break her resolve through emotional manipulation. She watched footage of cities burning and refugees fleeing with the same patient attention she gave everything else. occasionally commenting on tactical details or expressing admiration for human engineering. When they showed her images of human children killed in coalition bombardments, Amy began to cry. Silent tears ran down her face as she watched the footage, her composure finally cracking under the weight of others' suffering. The interrogators pressed their advantage, demanding information in exchange for promises to spare civilian populations. Amy dried her tears and asked if she could see the recordings again. She watched the footage of human suffering 3 more times, memorizing every detail with the same careful attention other beings gave to technical manuals. When the interrogators demanded an explanation for this behavior, Amy provided one with the same patient courtesy she showed everything else. She told them she was studying coalition tactics to better understand their enemy's nature. She was learning how beings who considered themselves civilized could justify targeting the innocent and defenseless. She was adding this knowledge to her understanding of what the war was really about and why it had to be fought, regardless of the cost. The interrogators realized they were not breaking their prisoner, but were themselves being studied and analyzed by someone who viewed them as specimens of an inferior form of life. On the 3rd day, Coalition Command authorized the use of their most extreme interrogation techniques. They had captured few humans alive during the war, and Amy represented their best opportunity to understand their enemy's psychological profile. They applied methods that had broken the strongest minds among every other species in the galaxy. Amy Chun began to sing. Human battle songs filled the interrogation chamber as coalition experts worked with increasing desperation to extract information from their subject. Amy's voice remained strong and clear, even as their techniques grew more extreme, rising above the sound of machinery and the frustrated voices of her captors. She sang about Earth and freedom and the right of all beings to determine their own destiny. When physical methods failed, they tried psychological manipulation on a deeper level. Coalition experts had developed techniques for rewriting memory and personality, turning captured enemies into willing collaborators through carefully applied mental pressure. The process was supposedly irresistible, breaking down individual identity and rebuilding it according to coalition specifications. Amy experienced the full treatment and emerged unchanged. She explained to her astonished captors that humans had long ago learned to separate their core identity from external circumstances. They could endure any physical or mental assault by retreating into internal spaces that no outside force could reach. Their sense of self was not dependent on their bodies or even their memories, but on abstract principles that existed independently of material conditions. She told them about the human concept of soul, the belief that consciousness itself contained elements beyond the reach of physical manipulation. Coalition science rejected such primitive concepts as superstition, but Amy's resistance suggested that humans had discovered psychological territories that more advanced species had never explored. The interrogation sessions ended when Amy made an offer that stunned her captors into silence. She volunteered to provide complete intelligence on human defensive capabilities and strategic planning. She would reveal everything the Coalition wanted to know about Earth's military preparations and the location of every important facility. She would cooperate fully with their intelligence-gathering efforts and assist in planning the final assault. On her homeworld. In exchange, she asked for one simple concession. She wanted Coalition forces to spare the civilian populations of 3 human colonies that had declared neutrality in the conflict. Non-combatant settlements with no military value, populated by families who had fled the war zones seeking safety for their children. Places that posed no threat to Coalition objectives and held no strategic importance. The interrogators were so surprised by this offer that they immediately contacted higher command for guidance. They had expected Amy to bargain for her own life, or the lives of her fellow soldiers. They had never encountered a prisoner willing to betray their entire species to save strangers they had never met.